Sarah Martinez had always known that her tattoo would raise eyebrows, but she never expected the level of ridicule she faced at the coffee shop that Tuesday morning. The intricate design on her forearm depicted an eagle soaring above waves, with coordinates etched beneath in precise military font. To most people passing by, it looked like another decorative piece of body art, perhaps something she had chosen on a whim during college. The trouble started when Jake Morrison, a local college student known for his loud opinions, spotted the tattoo as Sarah reached for her morning latte. His voice carried across the crowded cafe as he nudged his friends and pointed in her direction. "Look at that girl trying to be all military and tough," Jake snickered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Bet she got that tattoo to impress some guy or look cool. Probably doesn't even know what those numbers mean." Sarah's hand involuntarily tightened around her cup, but she kept her eyes forward, hopping to avoid confrontation. She had learned long ago that some battles were not worth fighting, especially not in public spaces where her every reaction would be scrutinized and judged. But Jake was not content to let it go. Emboldened by the chuckles from his friends, he raised his voice even louder, ensuring that everyone in the cafe could hear his commentary. "I mean seriously, what kind of person gets military coordinates tattooed on their arm? It's probably fake anyway. These wannabe tough girls always do stuff like this for attention. Next thing you know, she'll be claiming she served or something." The other patrons began to take notice now, some stealing glances at Sarah's tattoo, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. A few people pulled out their phones, sensing that drama was brewing and wanting to capture whatever might unfold. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, but she remained silent. She had faced worse criticism before, endured questioning looks and dismissive comments about her appearance and her choices. What these people did not understand was that every mark on her body told a story, carried weight that went far beyond their superficial judgments. Jake continued his performance, clearly enjoying the attention he was receiving from both his friends and the growing audience of onlookers. His comments grew more pointed and personal, dissecting not just her tattoo but her entire appearance. "And look at how she carries herself, all serious and stuff. Girl, this isn't a military base, it's a coffee shop. You can drop the act now. We all know you probably work at some boring office job and got that tattoo to feel special." The barista behind the counter looked increasingly uncomfortable, glancing between Sarah and Jake as if weighing whether to intervene. Other customers began whispering among themselves, some defending Sarah, others joining in with Jake's mockery. "Maybe she thinks she's in some action movie," another voice chimed in from Jake's group. "Those coordinates probably lead to her favorite shopping mall or something. It's all for show with people like her." Sarah finally turned to face her accusers, her expression calm but her eyes showing the depth of emotion she was holding back. The coordinates on her tattoo were not random numbers chosen for aesthetic appeal. They marked a specific location in the Persian Gulf, a place where she had spent 18 months of her life, where she had witnessed things that would stay with her forever. "You know what's funny about assumptions?" Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor of anger underneath. "They usually say more about the person making them than the person they're about." Jake laughed dismissively, not backing down from the confrontation he had started. "Oh, here we go. Now she's going to lecture us about assumptions. Lady, I'm just calling it like I see it. That tattoo is obviously fake military stuff for attention." The coordinates tattooed on Sarah's arm read 26, 7,505 degrees N, 55, 7,227 degrees E, marking a location in the Arabian Gulf where her SEAL team had conducted a high-stakes rescue mission 3 years earlier. The eagle above represented not just American strength, but the specific call sign her unit had used during operations that saved 17 hostages from a terrorist compound. But Sarah did not share this information with her accusers. She had learned that her service record was not something she owed to strangers, especially those who had already made up their minds about who she was based on her appearance alone. The tension in the coffee shop grew thicker as more people began to take sides. Some customers appeared uncomfortable with Jake's aggressive behavior, while others seemed entertained by the conflict. The barista continued to hover nervously, clearly wanting the situation to resolve itself without requiring intervention. "Look, I don't know what your story is," Jake continued, his confidence growing with each word. "But I know fake when I see it. Military people don't just sit around coffee shops looking all mysterious with their tattoos. They have real jobs, real responsibilities. You're probably just another Instagram influencer trying to look tough for your followers." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The irony of his statement was not lost on her. She had indeed been sitting in coffee shops recently, but not because she lacked real responsibilities. She was on medical leave, recovering from injuries sustained during her last deployment, trying to adjust to civilian life while her body and mind healed from trauma that Jake could never imagine. The tattoo he was mocking represented the most defining moment of her military career. The rescue mission at those exact coordinates had earned her unit a Navy Unit Commendation, and Sarah herself had received a Silver Star for her actions during the operation. But these achievements felt distant now, sitting in a civilian coffee shop while college students questioned her authenticity. "You want to know what I think?" Jake said, leaning back in his chair with a smug expression. "I think girls like you watch too many movies and think getting tough-looking tattoos makes you special. Real military people don't need to advertise it on their skin." The comment stung more than Sarah cared to admit. She thought about her teammates, about the brotherhood and sisterhood she had left behind when medical circumstances forced her early retirement from active duty. She thought about the friends who had not made it home from deployments, whose names were etched not in ink but in her memory. Around the coffee shop, the atmosphere had shifted from casual morning routine to uncomfortable spectacle. Some patrons had left, unwilling to witness or be associated with the confrontation. Others remained, either too invested in the drama to leave or too uncomfortable to move. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message, but she ignored it, focusing instead on maintaining her composure in the face of continued provocation. She had been trained to remain calm under pressure, to think strategically rather than react emotionally, but civilian life had different rules and different challenges. "I bet if we asked her what those numbers actually mean, she wouldn't even know," Jake said to his friends, speaking about Sarah as if she were not sitting just a few feet away. "It's probably her birthday or something equally meaningless. These fake military wannabes always pick random coordinates to look authentic." The coordinates were burned into Sarah's memory not just as ink on her skin, but as a reminder of the night her team had successfully extracted hostages from what intelligence had called an impossible situation. The location marked where she had crawled through enemy territory for 6 hours, where she had made life-and-death decisions that saved innocent lives. But sitting in this coffee shop, surrounded by civilians who saw only surface appearances, those memories felt like they belonged to someone else entirely. The disconnect between her military identity and her current civilian existence had never felt more pronounced than in this moment of public humiliation. The morning sun streamed through the cafe windows, illuminating the tattoo that had started this entire confrontation. Sarah wondered how many other veterans faced similar challenges, how many others had their service questioned or dismissed based on assumptions and stereotypes. As Jake continued his commentary, Sarah made a decision that would soon change everything. She pulled out her phone, not to document the harassment she was facing, but to send a message to someone who might understand the significance of what was happening. Someone who knew the true meaning behind the coordinates on her arm and the price that had been paid to earn them. 20 minutes had passed since Sarah sent the text message, and Jake's commentary had only grown more elaborate and cruel. He had moved from questioning her military credentials to making broader statements about women in combat roles, drawing approving nods from some patrons and disgusted looks from others. "I'm just saying, real soldiers don't need to prove anything with flashy tattoos," Jake declared, his voice carrying across the now-divided coffee shop. "Especially not female soldiers. They're probably too busy doing actual important work to worry about looking cool in coffee shops." Sarah had remained silent throughout his extended monologue, sipping her latte and checking her phone periodically. The message she had sent was simple: "Could use some backup at Riverside Cafe on 5th Street. Some people here have opinions about my ink." The recipient was Commander Lisa Chen, her former commanding officer, and one of the few people who truly understood what Sarah had endured during her service. Chen was currently stationed at the nearby naval base, overseeing SEAL training operations and community outreach programs. "You know what really gets me?" Jake continued, apparently energized by what he perceived as Sarah's inability to defend herself. "These fake military types always choose the most dramatic-looking tattoos. Eagles, coordinates, military sayings. It's like they're trying too hard to convince everyone they're something they're not." A middle-aged woman at a corner table finally spoke up, her voice cutting through Jake's monologue. "Excuse me, but don't you think you've said enough? This young woman hasn't bothered anyone, and you've been harassing her for half an hour." Jake turned his attention to the woman, his expression showing irritation at being challenged. "Look, lady, I'm not harassing anyone. I'm just pointing out obvious fake military stuff when I see it. People who really serve don't act like this." "Act like what?" the woman responded, her voice rising slightly. "Sitting quietly and drinking coffee. What exactly has she done that's so offensive to you?" "It's the principle," Jake replied, gesturing toward Sarah's tattoo. "Real veterans deserve respect, and people who fake military service take away from that. I'm just calling out what's obviously a fraud." Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time she glanced at the screen and saw a message from Commander Chen. "On my way. ETA 5 minutes. Try not to destroy them before I get there." Despite everything, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Chen had always had a way of lightening tense situations while simultaneously commanding absolute respect from everyone around her. If anyone could handle this situation appropriately, it was Commander Chen. The coffee shop had become increasingly polarized during Jake's extended performance. Several patrons had clearly taken his side, nodding along with his comments and making their own observations about military imposters. Others appeared disgusted by his behavior, with a few people having left entirely rather than witness the continued harassment. "I served 2 tours in Afghanistan," announced a man in his 40s who had been sitting near the window. "And I can tell you that this kind of behavior is exactly what gives civilians a bad name. You don't know anything about this woman's service record." Jake bristled at being contradicted by someone with actual military credentials. Well, if she really served, she could just show her DD-214 or something. Real veterans don't mind proving their service when questioned. "Real veterans also don't owe random strangers proof of their service," the man replied sharply. "And demanding someone's discharge papers in a coffee shop is ridiculous. Would you ask a doctor to show their medical license before believing they went to medical school?" The argument was beginning to draw attention from people passing by on the street. Several individuals had stopped outside the large windows to peer in at the commotion, and Sarah noticed that at least 2 people were recording the scene with their phones from outside. Sarah's tattoo had become the center of what was essentially a town hall debate about military service, stolen valor, and the assumptions people make about others based on appearance. The irony was not lost on her that Jake's attempt to call out what he perceived as fake military service had created exactly the kind of public spectacle that most real veterans would want to avoid. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean here," Jake said, his tone shifting slightly as he realized the crowd was turning against him. I just have a lot of respect for people who actually served, and it bothers me when I see obvious fakes trying to get credit for something they didn't do. "And what makes you so certain she's faking?" asked the woman who had spoken up earlier. "Have you asked her about her service? Have you given her any opportunity to explain before launching into your accusations?" Jake gestured toward Sarah dismissively. "She's had plenty of time to defend herself. Real veterans would have shut this down immediately if they were legit. The fact that she's just sitting there proves my point." What Jake did not understand was that Sarah's silence was not an admission of guilt or inability to defend herself. It was the disciplined response of someone who had been trained to assess situations carefully before acting. Someone who understood that sometimes the best tactical decision was to wait for the right moment rather than rush into confrontation. Sarah checked her phone again and saw another message from Commander Chen. "Pulling into parking lot now. Don't worry, this will be educational for everyone involved." The coffee shop's atmosphere had become increasingly tense, with clear battle lines drawn between those supporting Jake's right to question Sarah's authenticity and those defending her right to drink coffee without harassment. The barista had finally decided to intervene and was making her way around the counter with obvious reluctance. "Excuse me, everyone," the barista said nervously, "but we're getting complaints about the noise level, and this is making other customers uncomfortable. Maybe we could all just agree to disagree and enjoy our coffee." Jake laughed at the suggestion. "This isn't about agreeing to disagree. This is about calling out stolen valor when we see it. That woman is wearing military coordinates like some kind of fashion statement, and real veterans shouldn't have to put up with that disrespect." The man who had served in Afghanistan stood up from his table, his expression showing barely controlled anger. "Son, you need to back down right now. You're making accusations about something you clearly don't understand, and you're embarrassing yourself and everyone who has to listen to you." "I understand plenty," Jake replied defensively. "I understand that real military people don't need to advertise their service with dramatic tattoos. I understand that women especially like to pretend they're tough by getting military-looking ink. And I understand fake when I see it." Sarah's phone buzzed one final time. The message from Commander Chen was brief. "Coming through the front door in 30 seconds. Hope you're ready for this." Sarah looked toward the cafe's entrance, knowing that everything was about to change dramatically. Commander Chen was not someone who tolerated disrespect toward her former team members, and she had a particular talent for making people reconsider their assumptions in ways they would never forget. The coordinates on Sarah's arm had brought her teammates home safely from one of the most dangerous operations of her career. Those same coordinates were about to bring backup of a different kind, but equally effective in its own way. Jake continued his commentary, unaware that his audience was about to expand in a way that would completely alter the dynamic of the situation. "All I'm saying is that people who really earn the right to wear military symbols don't need to make a show of it in public places. Real warriors are humble about their service." As he spoke, the coffee shop's front door opened with a soft chime, and Commander Lisa Chen stepped inside. She was dressed in her Navy service uniform, her multiple ribbons and insignia immediately visible to everyone in the cafe. Her presence commanded instant attention, and conversations throughout the space began to fade as people noticed the obvious authority she carried. Sarah remained seated, but her posture subtly shifted as she prepared for what she knew would be an unforgettable conclusion to this morning's harassment. Commander Chen's eyes swept the room, quickly assessing the situation and identifying the key players in the drama that had been unfolding. The real education was about to begin. Commander Lisa Chen had seen many things during her 22 years of naval service, but the scene that greeted her in Riverside Cafe was uniquely infuriating. Her trained eyes immediately identified Sarah sitting calmly at her table, the familiar coordinates visible on her arm, while a young civilian held court near the counter, apparently lecturing a room full of strangers about military authenticity. Chen's approach was measured and deliberate, her service dress uniform drawing immediate attention from every person in the cafe. The ribbons on her chest told a story of distinguished service: Navy Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart, and numerous campaign medals that represented decades of operational excellence. Jake's monologue faltered as he noticed the uniformed officer entering the space, but his confidence remained intact. If anything, he seemed pleased to have what he assumed would be official validation of his position. "Oh, perfect," Jake said, turning toward Commander Chen with a satisfied expression. "Maybe you can help settle this debate, Commander. This woman here has been sitting with some obvious fake military tattoo, probably trying to get free drinks or attention or whatever. Real military people like yourself must get tired of dealing with posers like this." Commander Chen's expression remained neutral as she surveyed the scene, taking note of the divided room, the uncomfortable barista, and Sarah's composed demeanor despite being the target of sustained harassment. Her response, when it came, was measured and professional. "That's an interesting perspective," Chen said calmly. "Before I comment on authenticity, perhaps you could tell me what specific qualifications you have to identify fake military service. What's your background in evaluating combat decorations or operational experience?" Jake straightened, apparently interpreting this as encouragement rather than the challenge it actually was. "Well, I study military history and I watch a lot of documentaries. Plus, it's pretty obvious when someone's trying too hard to look military. Real soldiers are humble about their service, right?" "Fascinating theory," Chen replied, her tone remaining professionally neutral while her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "And you've determined that this woman's tattoo represents. What exactly? What do those coordinates mean to you?" "Probably her birthday coordinates or something meaningless like that," Jake said dismissively. "These wannabes always pick random numbers to look authentic. I bet she doesn't even know what location those numbers represent." Commander Chen turned her attention to Sarah for the first time since entering the cafe. "Petty Officer Martinez, would you mind sharing what those coordinates represent?" The use of Sarah's military rank sent a visible shock through the coffee shop. Jake's confident expression began to waver as he realized that the official validation he had been seeking was not developing in the direction he had expected. Sarah stood at attention automatically, her military bearing becoming instantly apparent to everyone in the room. "Those coordinates mark the extraction point for Operation Neptune's Reach, ma'am. Persian Gulf, 18 months ago. Hostage rescue mission that recovered 17 civilian contractors." "And your role in that operation?" Chen asked, though her tone indicated she already knew the answer. "Point woman for the rescue team, ma'am. I was responsible for establishing the safe corridor that allowed all hostages to reach the extraction point without casualty." The coffee shop had become completely silent now, with every patron focused on the exchange between the two military professionals. Jake's face had gone pale as he began to understand the magnitude of his error. Commander Chen nodded and then addressed the room at large, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect in any environment. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Petty Officer First Class Sarah Martinez, Navy SEAL, recipient of the Silver Star for extraordinary heroism in combat operations. The coordinates on her arm mark the location where she and her team successfully completed one of the most challenging rescue missions in recent naval special operations history." She paused, allowing this information to sink in before continuing. "Petty Officer Martinez spent 6 hours crawling through hostile territory to establish a safe extraction route, during which she eliminated multiple enemy combatants and personally carried 2 wounded hostages to safety. The tattoo you've been questioning commemorates not only that mission, but also the 3 teammates who didn't make it home from subsequent operations. The weight of Commander Chen's words settled over the cafe like a heavy blanket. Several patrons looked visibly ashamed of having witnessed or participated in Sarah's harassment without defending her. Others appeared stunned by the revelation of who had been sitting quietly among them. Jake stood frozen, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. The woman he had spent the better part of an hour mocking as a fake had accomplished more in a single mission than he could imagine achieving in a lifetime. Commander Chen was not finished. She approached Sarah's table and, in full view of everyone present, rendered a crisp military salute. Sarah returned the salute with equal precision, a gesture that carried profound meaning for anyone who understood military protocol. Petty Officer Martinez is currently on medical leave, Chen announced to the room, recovering from injuries sustained during her final deployment. She was medically retired with full honors after 8 years of distinguished service in naval special warfare. The revelation that Sarah was dealing with service-connected injuries while being publicly humiliated added another layer of gravity to the situation. Several patrons appeared close to tears as they realized the full scope of what they had witnessed. Chen turned her attention back to Jake, who seemed to have shrunk considerably since her arrival. "Young man, I believe you had some theories about military authenticity and how real warriors conduct themselves. Would you like to share those thoughts now?" Jake stammered, clearly searching for words that might somehow salvage the situation. I was just, I was trying to protect real veterans from people who fake their service. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't ask," Chen replied firmly. "You made assumptions based on gender stereotypes and personal prejudices, then used those assumptions to publicly humiliate a decorated combat veteran. That's not protecting anyone's honor. That's just ignorance disguised as patriotism." The barista, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide eyes, quietly approached Sarah's table and whispered, "Your coffee is on the house today, and every day you come in here. I'm so sorry about what happened." Other patrons began approaching as well, offering apologies and expressing their respect for Sarah's service. The atmosphere in the cafe had completely transformed from hostile spectacle to something approaching a recognition ceremony. Jake remained standing near the counter, looking increasingly isolated as people moved away from him and towards Sarah. The friends who had earlier encouraged his harassment had quietly slipped out of the cafe, leaving him to face the consequences of his actions alone. Commander Chen was not quite finished with her lesson. "Petty Officer Martinez, would you mind explaining to our audience why you chose not to defend yourself against these accusations?" Sarah's response was measured and professional. "Ma'am, civilian confrontations aren't worth potentially escalating into something that could reflect poorly on the service. Sometimes the most tactical response is to maintain position and wait for appropriate backup." "Outstanding judgment," Chen replied. "That's exactly the kind of discipline and strategic thinking that made you such an effective operator." She then addressed Jake one final time. "Son, I want you to understand something. The woman you've been mocking spent years of her life in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, making split-second decisions that saved innocent lives. She's earned the right to drink coffee wherever she wants, wearing whatever tattoos she chooses, without having to justify her existence to anyone." Jake nodded miserably, clearly understanding that any attempt at explanation or apology would only make things worse for him. Commander Chen's final words were directed to the entire cafe. Military service comes in many forms, and veterans transition back to civilian life in different ways. Some wear their service proudly, others prefer privacy. Some display their experiences openly, others keep them private. What they all deserve is basic respect and the benefit of the doubt. As Chen prepared to leave, she placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Take care of yourself, Martinez. You've earned every bit of peace and quiet you can find." Sarah smiled for the first time that morning. "Thank you for the backup, ma'am, just like old times." After Commander Chen left, the cafe slowly returned to normal operations, but with a fundamentally changed atmosphere. Sarah found herself surrounded by people wanting to hear her stories, thank her for her service, and apologize for what she had endured. Jake quietly gathered his belongings and left without another word, presumably to reconsider his assumptions about military authenticity and the wisdom of publicly challenging people based on appearances alone. The coordinates on Sarah's arm had once again brought rescue to a dangerous situation, though this time the battlefield was a coffee shop, and the enemy was ignorance rather than armed combatants. The tattoo that had been mocked as fake decoration had been revealed for what it truly was, a memorial to courage, sacrifice, and the bonds forged in the crucible of combat. As Sarah settled back into her chair with a fresh cup of coffee, courtesy of an apologetic management, she reflected on how quickly situations could change when the right backup arrived at the right moment. Some battles were worth fighting after all, especially when you had a commanding officer willing to ensure that the truth was heard above the noise of uninformed opinion. The morning had begun with mockery and ended with honor restored, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice is simply the quiet revelation of truth.